of Melitopol, specifically targeting a mobile logistics hub, a temporary air defense radar site, and a forward command center tucked behind the H-08 highway corridor. This operation wasn't random. It was the next phase of a broader Ukrainian push along the Tokmak-Melitopol axis, designed to sever Russia's land bridge to Crimea and collapse the occupying forces' southern flank. Intelligence from satellite imagery and intercepted communications had pinpointed a window of vulnerability. Russia had recently shifted supply operations to mobile depots and orchards and abandoned industrial zones just outside Melitopol, believing distance from the front line would shield them. But Ukraine had other plans. Russian forces had stationed Su-30 SM Flanker C multi-role fighters on high alert at Tokmak Air Base, rotating continuous combat air patrols over Zaporizhia Oblast. Each Su-30 was armed with R-77 medium-range missiles and backed by Bar-Zar phased array radar, capable of scanning over 90 miles and engaging multiple aerial targets simultaneously. Their primary job: intercept low-flying Su-25 before they could breach Russian airspace. In theory, it was a solid layered defense: Su-32 in the sky, Pantsir and Buk systems on the ground, and reconnaissance drones overhead. But what Russia didn't anticipate was how low, how fast, and how precisely Ukraine was willing to strike. What was supposed to be a quiet pre-dawn patrol turned into a 4-minute ambush from the shadows, one that would humiliate Russia's air cover and ignite fires behind enemy lines. Russia's layered air defense around Melitopol was built on the assumption that nothing could slip through unseen or unchallenged. At the heart of that umbrella were Su-30 SM fighters, providing top cover and rotating combat air patrols. These jets were armed with R-77 active radar-guided missiles, effective range approximately 55 miles, and R-73 heat-seeking missiles for close-quarters engagements. The NO-11 M-Bar-Zar radar, mounted inside the Su-30's nose, could track low-flying aircraft at ranges up to 93 miles, even through ground clutter and ECM interference. In theory, it gave Russian pilots a 2-minute intercept window against any intruding jet. Beneath the Su-32, the ground layer included Pantsir S-1 short-range air defense systems, stationed along resupply corridors and command posts. Each Pantsir combined a dual 30mm autocannon with 12 surface-to-air missiles that could intercept targets within 12 miles, making them ideal for stopping drones, cruise missiles, or low-flying aircraft. Further out, Buk and 2 systems provided the medium-range defense team, capable of hitting targets as far as 30 miles away, with multi-target tracking and launch on search capabilities. These units were networked with the Nebo-M radar array, a VHF band system designed specifically to detect stealth aircraft and low RCS targets like drones. One of these radars had been spotted operating just north of the Melitopol airport complex. To complete the picture, Orlan-10 reconnaissance drones loitered along expected Ukrainian flight paths. These UAVs relayed real-time telemetry and could designate GPS coordinates for ground-based intercepts or cue Pantsir radars to go active. From high to low, from radar to missile, Russia believed its net was impenetrable. But what Moscow didn't factor in was that Ukraine wasn't coming in high or loud or obvious. They were coming in under the radar, using terrain as their cloak and timing as their weapon. And when the trap was finally sprung, Russia's billion-ruble shield couldn't stop a $2 million ambush. Knowing full well the density of Russian air defenses, Ukraine didn't try to overpower the system, they outsmarted it. Just before 4:45 a.m., Su-25 front-foot attack aircraft slipped into Russian-held airspace, flying below 100 feet, barely taller than a utility pole. Their route took them through irrigation canals, wheat fields, and derelict rail yards terrain specifically chosen to confuse radar returns and break line of sight. One of the Su-25 was fitted with an SBS-141 ECM pod, a Soviet-era jamming system designed to disrupt radar tracking and scramble missile lock-on attempts. It flew in tight formation with the second aircraft, which carried a combat loadout of 80mm S-13 rockets and a 100-pound KAB 500-liter laser-guided bomb, more than enough firepower to shatter a hardened command post or ammo dump. Roughly 12 minutes before the real strike, a decoy aircraft, a retired An-2 biplane modified with radar reflectors and heat flares, was launched to mimic the radar signature of a fighter jet cruising at 10,000 feet. Russian early warning systems snapped into action, activating buck radars and Pantsir tracking units, prematurely exposing their positions and burning precious engagement cycles. With Russian radars now pointing upward, the real attackers crawled in beneath detection range. By the time the defenders realized the threat wasn't coming from above, but from the tree line at 90 feet and 520 miles per hour, it was already too late. This was not a brute force mission. It was chess at 400 knots, where jamming pods, decoys, and flight paths became weapons in their own right. And against the defense unpredictable threat profiles, unpredictability became Ukraine's deadliest asset. At 4:47 a.m., just as the decoy aircraft crossed the 10,000-foot mark and began flaring aggressively, a Russian Pantsir S-1 battery near the H-08 highway made its fatal mistake. It locked onto the Ghost. Assuming a legitimate threat, the system fired 2 surface-to-air missiles at the radar-reflective decoy. The launch plume and active radar signature immediately gave away the Pantsir's position, lighting it up like a flare on Ukrainian targeting scopes. That's when the real strike began. Flying just 90 feet off the deck, the lead Su-25 crested a small rise in the terrain, then climbed sharply to 1,500 feet for just under 3 seconds. That was all it needed. The pilot released a Cab 500 precision-guided bomb, laser-locked onto a camouflaged Russian supply truck convoy parked under netting near a tree line. The 1,100-pound munition punched through the cover, detonating directly above the trucks and triggering a chain reaction of secondary explosions, ammunition, fuel, and even a pallet of artillery shells cooked off in sequence. Nearby, a Msta S-152mm self-propelled howitzer, still warm from earlier shelling, was caught in the blast radius and torn apart. The second Su-25 followed in trail, releasing a volley of S-13 unguided rockets into a command post, composed of prefab shelters and tents, shredding communications equipment, and likely eliminating several field officers. Just as Russian Su-30SM fighters scrambled from Tokmak Air Base and screamed toward the site at Mach 1.2, the Ukrainian pair vanished behind a ridgeline, already pulling low and banking west toward safety. In under 4 minutes, Ukraine had cracked open Russia's southern defensive node, inflicted heavy logistical damage, and disappeared before the enemy could even get a missile lock. For a system built to react, Russia simply reacted too late. Just 90 seconds after the strike, as smoke still rose from burning supply trucks and twisted artillery shells, one Russian Su-30SM finally made visual contact with the retreating Su-25 second. The flanker screamed in from the east at over 800 miles per hour, banking aggressively in pursuit, hungry for revenge. But Ukraine was ready for this too. As the Su-25 second dropped altitude again, diving back below 200 feet, the lead aircraft deliberately altered course, pulling slightly north, toward a narrow tree-lined valley pre-rigged by Ukrainian infantry the night before. And in those woods were 2 teams equipped with Igla-S manpads, shoulder-launched infrared-guided missiles with a kill range of up to 3.7 miles. The Su-25 pilot baited the Su-30, knowing the faster jet would need to drop lower and throttle up to keep radar lock. It worked. The Russian pilot, flying too fast for the tight terrain, let loose an R-73 Archer missile, an infrared dogfight weapon built for close-range kills. But the Su-25 countered with a perfectly timed flare burst, ejecting dozens of white-hot magnesium flares that confused the missile seeker just enough to throw it wide. At that moment, the first Igla-S launched rising from the tree line with a high-pitched scream. The Su-30's onboard warning system blared. The pilot, realizing he'd been dragged into a man-pad's kill zone, instantly banked hard and punched countermeasures, climbing and fleeing eastward. He didn't fire again. In just 90 seconds, a 4th-generation air superiority fighter was outwitted by a subsonic ground attacker, a team of camouflaged infantry, and a battlefield that had been shaped days in advance. This wasn't a dogfight. It was a trap, and Russia flew straight into it. When the dust settled and the smoke finally began to clear, the results of Ukraine's precision ambush were undeniable and devastating. At least 3 Russian logistics trucks were completely destroyed. Satellite imagery later showed their twisted frames scattered across a burned field near the H-08 highway. These vehicles were loaded with 152mm artillery shells, fuel drums, and electronic components intended for Russian EW systems, all now reduced to charred wreckage. The KAB 500-liter bomb had collapsed the roof of a makeshift warehouse, where a Panzer S-1 air defense unit had been concealed. The blast not only destroyed the vehicle, but also buried its radar and missile systems under several tons of steel and debris, rendering the site unusable. Attempts to recover parts were abandoned within 24 hours due to ongoing secondary explosions from stored ordnance. One Su-30 SM fighter, the same jet that had pursued the Ukrainian Su-25 at treetop level, suffered serious wing damage after striking a large bird during its low-altitude chase. The impact splintered part of the right wing's leading edge, forcing the pilot to declare an emergency and conduct a hard landing at Tokmak Air Base. The aircraft was towed off the runway under escort and is believed to require full wing panel replacement. Meanwhile, both Ukrainian Su-25 made it back to base without a scratch. Post-flight telemetry showed all systems green, and GoPro footage from the cockpit confirmed direct hits on target zones. In under 5 minutes, Ukraine had inflicted material damage on a $20 million fighter jet, a $15 million air defense unit, and irreplaceable supply assets without losing a single aircraft. It wasn't just a successful raid. It was a statement. Tactical intelligence and terrain mastery can outgun billion-dollar systems every time. This strike didn't just destroy vehicles or damage a fighter jet. It tore a hole in the logic of Russia's entire southern air defense posture. Moscow's strategy around Melitopol relied on a floating air defense net, a mix of Su-30 SM fighters, high-powered radar systems like Nebo-N, and a patchwork of Panzer S-1 and Milk-2 batteries. The idea was simple: create a 360-degree aerial kill zone, where any incoming threat would be detected, tracked, and eliminated before it could reach a high-value target. But Ukraine didn't play by that rulebook. What this operation exposed is that Russia's aerial net has holes, and they're low. The entire system is optimized for threats coming in at mid to high altitude. It's not designed to spot subsonic attackers flying 50 feet above the ground, weaving through trees and buildings, shielded by terrain. The heavy reliance on Orlan 10 recon drones to fill these blind spots only made the problem worse. These drones are slow, fly at predictable altitudes, and are easily jammed or misled. Without them, Russia's situational awareness can radar coverage. That's how an old Soviet-era Su-25, a jet built in the 1972nd for ground attack, slipped through a supposedly impenetrable system and scored multiple direct hits without even being targeted. This wasn't about tech superiority. It was about understanding terrain, timing, and human ingenuity. Russia thought control of the skies depended on having faster jets, longer-range radars, and layered SAM networks. But Ukraine just proved that control of the skies belongs to whoever can think one layer deeper. And sometimes, that means using the wrong aircraft in exactly the right way. In an era dominated by drones, stealth jets, and satellite-guided munitions, it's easy to write off the Su-25 Frogfoot as a museum piece, a Cold War relic meant for a battlefield long gone. But this mission proves otherwise. Flying just feet above the wheat fields of Zaporizhia, a decades-old jet armed with a single 100-pound bomb, and a pilot willing to fly nap of the earth accomplished what cruise missiles and loitering drones couldn't. A precise, manned, and timed punch straight through Russia's best defenses. Unlike a drone, the Su-25 could adapt in real time. Unlike a missile, it could think. And unlike a $50 million stealth aircraft, it could fly through radar shadows without needing to be invisible, just clever. Russia has spent billions of dollars
the Russian armed forces with an essential foothold in Europe,
blanketing it in radar, fighters, and SAM systems designed to repel high-tech threats. But it was a $3 million jet from the Soviet era that cracked it open. This wasn't a glitch. It was a feature of asymmetric warfare. Ukraine isn't trying to match Russia system for system. It's trying to outlearn the battlefield. Using jammers, decoys, and weapons. paired with intelligence, still has a place in modern war. The lesson here isn't